Hi everybody, thanks for coming to my talk. I have a bit of a cold, so don't mind me. It's a fast-paced talk. If we don't have that much time to cover all the nitty-gritty details about anti-forensic, about operating system stuff, if you have questions afterwards, please ping me on LinkedIn, on different social medias. I'm tweeting regularly. I'm active on blogs, on social media. Just ping me. Grateful to share the slides with you afterwards. That's the details. Visit Switzerland. We have beautiful mountains as well. Let's go. Let's talk about anti-forensics. The funny thing is that screenshot here comes from this is really a blast from the past for me, because when I started in that field back in the 90s, yes, I'm that old, I have gray hair, I read that paper from a group called the Hacker's Choice. They are still active in the field, and they published a paper, How to Cover Your Tracks. The interesting thing is that some of these techniques, like clearing log files on a Linux system, are still valid up to date. Attackers are still using the same techniques which were used in the 90s. They're still using that 25. So the whole thing here about that talk is, how do we as blue teamers are still lagging behind? I had a heated debate last evening about a guy who said it's impossible to find APTs in our networks. My state is more, I was arguing it's not impossible to find these attackers. You have to just watch better and look better in your network. Also a thing is, and some people in the blue team industry are raging against this one, about open source tools which are published on GitHub, and also this project here, it's called Forensia, which might clean a lot of traces on your operating system, just forensically, or forensic artifacts we as incident responders use to find you as an attacker or you as a red teamer. And also my take here is challenge accepted, because I think it's nearly impossible, and I will prove that later on in the slides, even if you try to cover traces and if you erase traces on a system, these erasing steps leave traces on a system, and you're still able, or you might be able to find further traces down the road. So, cover your tracks. Plain and simple, delete a file, because we see that a lot of time in our incident response cases, attackers entering a system, they're running a tool, they're running a script, and they just delete that thing. Maybe they delete it also from the recycle bin, but keep in mind, when you delete a file in Windows, it's not automatically purged. It's a thing called the NTFS, so the file system, and a phone book called the master file table. Every time you delete a file with a GUI in Windows, it's only marked as deleted on that master file table. So you're telling the operating system, this space here on the operating system, you can reuse that. So that's really interesting coming from an incident response perspective or standpoint or background. You have the chance to recover data even if the attackers deleted that one. So what we are doing here, I'm using a tool called Velociraptor. It's open source, it's amazing. We use Velociraptor a lot in our cases. What I'm using here is the Velociraptor Hunt MFT, and I'm searching for a keyword. I'm searching for rclone.conf. rclone is a widely known software and used by attackers to exfiltrate data out of a network. What I'm trying to find here is the credentials the attackers have used to exfiltrate the data to a foreign system, to a mega account or S3 bucket or whatever. All I have to know is a keyword, and I can search the master file table. And amazingly, I was successful. So the hunt returned 4 hits, and what I got back was an MFT number. Like I said, on the master file table, we use IDs for files. So every file on the MFT get an ID. With Velociraptor, I can use that ID and try to recover that file, even if it's deleted. I use that Velociraptor tool here, and amazingly, I get the plain text configuration file back from the attacker. Clear text credentials, which the attacker used to log in his foreign system to exfiltrate data. We passed on that information to law enforcement. Law enforcement was able to delete the stolen data the attacker took from the breach network. This is amazing techniques and underused. I preach that technique all the time to my team. If you find traces of a script, of an executable which is deleted, search it on the NFT. search it, make it a habit. Don't just assume it's gone, because most of the time we were successful of recovering stuff. The thing is, and also one of the things I think Blue Team is lagging behind, we are repeating the same steps all over again. People are just discussing the same tools, the same software, the same script all over again. Just two examples here. One is from InversoSec, she discussing SDelete. One is from a recent Hack the blog post, also discussing SDelete. SDelete is highly used by attackers to leave traces. And this one here is a purple slide, because I think all these slides are marked blue, red, and purple on the left-hand corner. And I think SDelete is so heavily flagged by antivirus with signatures, with tooling and EDRs. I, as an attacker, why not use something different? And then I go ahead and said, with just a few lines of PowerShell code, I could do the same. So I created my own SDelete version just with PowerShell, which is not flagged by antivirus, which is not flagged by EDR vendors, and I can just purge my traces as well. So I'm not trying to help the red team or the attackers here. I just find it's kind of funny that we as defenders are just reusing or rediscussing all the same tools, not thinking outside of the box. What could I do as an attacker? Be creative, to find more solutions to that problem. More deleted files funds. On the right-hand side, this is a screenshot from Volexity. They are discussing another tool, it's called Cypher. Cypher is a native built-in Windows tool, also for purging traces on a system. With Cypher, you will not find traces in the MFT, so recovering that file is not possible anymore if the attacker used that one. But just given when you're doing incident response, it might be enough sometimes to just prove that the tool was run on the system, that an attacker was active on the system, and you find traces of execution. We call that evidence of execution. Evidence of execution is super helpful for building timelines, for finding more traces on different systems, so you can hunt your network for these traces. What I'm also using a lot, besides MFT, the master file table, is the USN, the so-called journal. Every time something changed on a Windows operating system, Windows keeps track of renaming, of creation, of deleting. This is covered in a thing called journal. With Velociraptor, again, you can read out the journal. The really interesting thing is, and it's bold here, but depending on how active the system is and how big the journal is configured to be, it can retain weeks or even months of change history. Just given that an attacker cleared his traces, also the files, and you don't find traces in the MFT, you might find traces of a tool or a file in the USN journal. An example from a real case here, we see above a service installation. So an attacker created a service on a compromised machine with run DLL /windows/temp png, and I was able to find the exact time the attacker dropped that PNG file on the system. That PNG file was long gone on the system, and I was just relying on the event logs to say a service was installed, but I also could pinpoint the file drop in the USN journal. So you see we have different strategies to find sources or find evil on a system. Not only event logs, but also master file table and USN journal. However, as an attacker, I think all good. So the first screenshot, I'm using Velociraptor again. I'm searching the USN journal. The second screenshot, I'm rerunning that hunt and I get 0 returns back. Why is that? Because as an attacker, I can just utilize that command here, fsutl USN delete journal, and the whole traces are gone. I've never, or I rarely seen an attacker doing this one, utilizing this command here in public blog posts. Maybe you guys here in the audience have more experience or saw that more in cases. However, Elastic Security also got that covered. So maybe they saw it as well. I think it's a pretty cool technique. As blue teamer, as a blue teamer, I find really a ton of good information inside the USN. As an attacker, I also have an easy win because I can just delete my traces. And I just figure all the time, I think to myself, who actually would see when an attacker are using that command with an EDR, with command line login? How many companies in that room would or have a rule for exactly this command here? That might be something you want to check out later in the week or next week. So, SRAM, also one of my most loved artifacts. It's called the System Resource Usage Monitor, and it's also a built-in Windows feature for tracking which applications are run on your system, network usage, and they are laughing because I personally love it. It's creating a distinctive timeline of events that can confirm what was run. Again, that whole talk is about it's nearly impossible to clear all your traces on a system. And that's why I'm so heated in these debates when somebody told me, yeah, as an APT, I can free roamly in a network. It's impossible that you as a blue teamer, you will find me. Because I say as a blue teamer, it's impossible to leave no traces on a system. Yeah, Forenzia, purge as much traces as possible. Because funny thing is, it's also from a real case here. What I saw, no traces of that write 86 file, that file here on that host, checked MFT and USN, so the two artifacts we discussed before, but I found traces in the SRAM database. So I see timestamps, I see paths, and I see clearly that the attacker used that write tool for something. Maybe I don't have no idea what's the purposes of that tool, but at least I know that the attacker used that tool. With the knowledge of that tool, with a file name, I can search my network for further traces. I can do a hunt, a sweep in my network. This is gold. As an attacker, I can just purge as much traces possibly, but maybe I forgot something and I still have chances to find you. However, this slide here is red again. I can stop that service, that DPS service, and the SRAM database will not populate it with more events. So that's also something I could do as an attacker. But then I thought, what about cleaning only certain events in that database? And then I went ahead and said, hey, ChatGPT, I'm a bad coder. How can I do that? How can I clean just certain events in that SRAM database? And then ChatGPT came along and said, yeah, that's not a problem. Tables to scan, add remove, depending on need. Application resource usage, network data usage, app usage, and then just a simple query, where application ID like keyword or app name like keyword. And then I asked ChatGPT, are you sure about this code? And ChatGPT said, yeah, I'm 100% sure this code will work. And then the reality is job security for the next few years, because effectively this is the whole SRAM database. It's just a bunch of hex. And then I have to decode the blob. So what you're seeing here, it's not just keywords, because I have to decode the hex and get rid of these null bytes here, and then I see the code. I mean, it would not be as complicated as it seems to code something which will parse that database, but it's not as simple as just asking ChatGPT. I personally think we still have job security in our field because it still needs some expertise and somebody who looks at that stuff properly. Time stomping. Maybe one of the most discussed terms in digital forensics and incident response and also in hacking is time stomping. This one here is 3 years ago from Pentest Hackfest, from Rob Lee. Rob Lee, I'm sure you heard that name before. It's one of the top names in our industry. And Rob Lee, in that presentation 3 years ago, he said, two telltale signs of time stomping. She said, all 0 fractional seconds. So most of the tools which are used to time stomping, they set the microseconds to zeros. And yes, that might be true for some tools. And also, funny thing is that here gets taught all the time, because in Windows we have different time. We have different times. So one time for the file name and one for the modification and whatnot. And as an attacker, the most common thing is, or what people are thinking is, it's not possible to change the modification date of a file name. that might be true only to some extent. And what Rob Lee is saying here is, hey, when you see something like this, so the birth time here is older than the modification time here from the file name, you have an attacker or something is playing with your system here. Velociraptor, also coming back to that one here from Mike Cohen, he said, suspect timestamp, so Velociraptor, that open source tool, have a built-in detection mechanism for timestamping. Again, what we are seeing here, the birth time is different, so that gets flagged by Velociraptor. And I made a little test in my lab. I said, okay, let's recreate that one here. And we see the birth time of the file is different what the birth time of the file name in the MFT indicates. So we have a mismatch. That cannot be, because what most digital forensic practitioners and also incident responders think is that as an attacker, I cannot do a modification of that FMB time here. That is true, just coming from a tool perspective. Because of PatchGuard, I cannot do a modification of that value here. It's forbidden by the operating system. But however, and this is really hilarious, fun fact, if you want also to timestamp on the file name timestamp, you can just rename the file and rename it back. Windows will copy the timestamp from the SI attribute to the file name when renaming the file. And suddenly, I can control that artifact. I can control that value. So just coming back, I can share the slide with you afterwards. Suddenly, this one here is not longer true. It's really, really easy to timestamp both artifacts here. And also here, the 0 seconds, that was just because I use PowerShell to do it as an example. There are tools in the internet which get also rid of the 0 seconds here. So as an attacker or defender, timestamping is not as easy to detect as you might think it is. It's just teach all over the place. Everybody in every digital forensic class, they love teaching about timestamping. Just be careful what you're investigating. Okay, 12 minutes left. Some Linux stuff is coming ahead. Clearing the message. This one here is from a blog post from Mandiant. It's kind of recent, I think. I don't have the date here. I think it's from this year. So what Mandiant is describing here is that attackers, once they breached an appliance, they cleared the D-message. D-message is the kernel runtime buffer. So everything or every time you do something with the kernel, loading a module, logging in, for example, that gets stored here in that file. So the attacker entered the box, they pwned the box, and they said, we are clever, we are clearing our tracks with that D-message here. Anti-forensics in action. Here, D-message, loading module out of 3 module times kernel, that's bad. And because that's bad, because I, as an attacker, I just loaded a rootkit on that Linux server, what I do is I D-message -C, so I clear the message, and suddenly I don't have any output in that command. So as a system administrator or incident responder, when I enter the box, I don't have traces anymore. Or at least as an attacker, I would say I don't have traces anymore. Turns out you just have to be careful where you look at. These kernel messages, they are not only stored in D-message, in the kernel ring buffer, they are also stored in a file called kern.log. Again, coming back to my point, it's mostly impossible to erase, to trace almost all your evidence on a system. And that's why I'm saying all over the time, it's not, you can really find evil in your network. You can find attackers in your network. You just have to be careful where to look at. Turns out, besides that file here, so again, as a recap, the attackers love clearing stuff, as we see here. So they try to cover their traces. But also we have a modern operating system, or modern Linux operating systems a thing called a journal. And even if you're clearing D-message, the kernel ring buffer, you still have to think about the journal. As a Linux forensicator, the journal is a treasure trove of information. So even if the attacker, like we saw on the Hacker's Choice paper, tried to delete the last log, the VW10 log or whatever, you still have the journal. And then I think, okay, I'm a clever attacker, I will clear the journal, because then you are out of your options, right? Mandiant again, from a blog called a company, Yoroi company. They said one of the sneakiest comments we noticed, the bleach one, able to delete all B time, V time, W, blah, blah, blah. So what they are doing, so what the attackers did in that case here, they tried to remove as much traces as possible again. This technique, this group was covered by Mandiant, so it's not just something I made up, it's really from real cases. Again, coming back to our journal, just stating that the attackers are clearing last log, syslog, secure, which will log all the authentication attempts and logins in your system. I mean, it's kind of hilarious that the attackers do not clear the journal, because everything they try to clear up when deleting those files, that information is still covered by the journal. Again, coming back to my phrase, I'm repeating here myself, because it's really hard to stay undetected on a system, be it Mac OS, be it Linux, be it Windows. You just have to know where to look at. However, I can clear the journal. As a smart attacker, I know I can use that command here, journal CTL rotate, journal CTL vacuum time, and then you see done, free journals from Marlock journal. I purged about over 600 megabytes of journal information of forensic traces. However, clearing logs generates, well, other logs. And that's what I'm saying. It's nearly impossible to stay undetected on a system. Even if you try to cover up your operations, you still leave traces on a system. When you are a sneaky system administrator, or you're logging all your command line, or you're paying attention to your log files, when you see something like this one, receive client request to rotate journal, rotating, who would detect something? If you are not frequently rotating your journals in a daily operation, this might be a sign that somebody is active on your system. Again, it's really hard to stay undetected as an attacker. Who will notice anyway, this is from Elastic, the open source rules from Elastic, the journal CTL command is not covered. Maybe nobody will care anyway. Maybe you as an organization next week, when you have 5 minutes, you want to check this out. Maybe that would be a good hint. Last section, I think, and I still have 7 minutes, cool. It's called memfd create. Fileless attacks, memory-only attacks, they are super popular on Windows. Everybody uses them. Shellcode loaders, loading stuff from the internet, just injecting it into memory. This one here is from a blog called a company called Wiz. They are super famous in doing cloud incident response and cloud security. Python-based fileless malware targets cloud workload to deliver crypto miners. And then I thought, yeah, what exactly is it really harder on Linux to investigate fileless EA just in-memory payloads than it would be on Windows? Turns out these techniques here, how to bring a file in memory in Linux, they are 20 plus years old. Nothing has really changed. And it's really simple, actually. What I'm doing here is just, I'm taking a binary, so the fortune binary, and I'm creating a syscall here with /proc/cell/fd binary, and then starting that binary. You don't have to fully understand the code. The gist of it, the bottom line is it's super, super simple to run a binary in memory only under Linux. We see that here in action. That Python code actually works. So what we are seeing here is just a quote from Shakespeare, just to prove the point. And then Wiz came along and said, harder to detect, investigate. They said, it's harder to investigate, it's harder to detect. And then my team colleague and I, we had a talk last year in Munich at B-Sites about especially these techniques. I don't have much time here to go into depth about /proc. Just, it's on YouTube, you can look it up if you want to. /proc is one of the most underrated file system and forensic treasure troves in my opinion. Because again, as an attacker, I might be able to run a file directly in memory, but that file in memory lives still in memory, right? So as we're discussing here, it's still possible for a defender, for incident responder to take that binary out of the /proc file system and just use it and analyze it. And then I thought, how can I make the life of a blue teamer harder. And then I stumbled about a technique, it's called the dynamic loader. Dynamic loader on Linux does exactly this one, so nomen est omen. What the loader does, it takes your binary, it combines your binary with all the needed binaries from different shared libraries and just run your code, right? The thing here is, and this might be something you can tamper with command line login, etc., because when you directly instruct the loader to load your binary, it will load that binary. So it's the same basically as just running the binary or with the loader. Why is that interesting? Because when an ELF file gets loaded into Linux, what I can do is I go to that /proc/pid directory and I have a thing called exe. So every file in Linux lives in memory. As an incident responder, I just can go ahead and copy that file out because it's still mapped in memory. And it's super easy. Even if the code lives fileless, an attacker uses a fileless technique, I still can go on the /proc directory and copy it out. Then I thought, okay, what about my loader technique? And this one here is super interesting because when I go to the /proc directory, do an executable, the executable points to my loader and not to my executable. And now, what can I do as an incident responder? I cannot copy it out, but all I can do is just, yeah, I have the loader here. How do I get my binary back? It turns out it's really simple, and coming back again, it's hard to stay undetected because the file still have to run in memory. Your file is not magically just gone because you're using a fileless technique. What we are seeing here is called the /proc/maps directory. My executable is living inside the memory region. And what I can do, thanks ChatGPT, this one actually worked. Because I'm a bad coder, you don't have to understand the code. It effectively just pour over that directory here and get all the memory out and combine it back to an executable file. And I get an executable file back. So again, it's really, really hard for an attacker to stay undetected. Every technique I use as an attacker, be it fileless, be it tracing of artifacts, being traces of whatever you might leave on a file system, I have chances to find you, I have chances to just show that somebody touched my system. And yeah, 2 minutes. If somebody have a question. I know it was a fast-paced talk. I'm more than happy to share the slides or to discuss with you afterwards. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, Stephan. We have time for questions. There are mics. Do we have any? I see one.
Can you speak loudly?
Go ahead.
On NTFS, you have file streams that are attached to files. You can store data in them. Have you come across any incident where the information has been hidden inside a file stream attached to a file?
No. I've worked hundreds of incident response cases. I just read it all the time. And this one is also one of these techniques which is discussed all over the place. Yeah, all these metadata you can use in different streams, and the NTFS, no. But maybe somebody else have. Once, yeah. That's why you're working for a top-notch company.
All right, I don't see more questions. So thank you again, Stephan, for an insightful presentation. And we have a break before the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you.